Hey everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Eat My Globe, a podcast about things you didn't know about food. And I am delighted to have on my episode today one of my favourite people. This lady writes about food for the New York Times, The Contrarian, Newsweek, and the New Jersey Monthly, among others. She has a wonderful podcast, which I've been on, which is called The Secret Life of Cookies, and has a fine Substack resume and community. She has also written a terrific book, which is called The Secret Life of Chocolate Chip Cookies, Exciting New Ways to Enjoy Everyone's Favorite Dessert. It is this and the history in general of cookies that is something we want to discuss today. I really wrote an essay on my podcast, The History of British Biscuits. So now I wanted to let a real expert of the cookie explain the difference. As she says about herself, Marissa has a fancy graduate degree, I love this, from Cambridge University and earned her professional qualifications as a chef from the Institute of Culinary Education. Yet, she still gets nervous when asked to make a custard, as indeed do I. I am very, very pleased to introduce my chum, Marissa Rothkopf Bates.
Thank you so much for having me. I am truly delighted to be here. Thank you.
Oh, no, I'm so pleased that you've been on because we've been trying to think of ways we could get you on, and I think this is a perfect one. So first of all, though, how are you doing? I haven't spoken to you for a little while.
Really well. I'm doing very well. Thank you so much.
Good. But
I'm coming to you from my kitchen where I bake all my cookies.
Well, that's fantastic. Before we go into the subject of cookies, what is going on in your life right now? Have you got any events? Have you got more of the podcasts? Have you got anything like that we could let our listeners know?
Thank you for asking. I put out a weekly, sometimes bi-weekly Substack at Marissa Rothkopf, .substack.com. But there I put out a new recipe almost every week. And so at this point, having been on there for 5 years, I have a cache of 250 recipes that I've been doing. And every couple of weeks, I'll do a live interview, live podcast with a newsmaker or somebody who knows a lot about the news. And we talk about whatever's going on, but also about baking and cookies. It's a strange mixture, but it sort of works.
I think you do that, and I think you do it really, really well, I have to say, because, talking about cookies, I think, draws away from otherwise impossible circumstances right now. But we won't talk about that. Now, let's get this straight, shall we? First of all, you tell us the difference between the American cookies and the British biscuits, because a lot of people, both in Britain and here, just say they're the same, and they're not, are they?
I don't think they are. I think the British biscuit is its very own, very special, unique thing. I think a lot of people will say, I think people like to narrow it down and people like black and white, and not just black and white cookies, which is a whole other time. But people like to say British biscuits are crunchy and American cookies are soft, which is, of course, not true. Originally, that is the truth. Koekje, the word in Dutch that we get cookie from in this country that the nice Dutch people brought over for us, literally means cook in Dutch means soft cake. And so koekje means little soft cake, which you have to imagine, like the word little soft cake. I should change my name to Little Soft Cake. It just sounds, it's like poetry to me. Anyway, so I think that's why people will say, oh, American cookies are soft. But what's the most famous American cookie, right? We have the chocolate chip cookie in the homemade version, can be partly soft, but also crunchy. And then you have the Oreo, which the world over is known as a crunchy sandwich cookie. So,
yeah, I went recently, I was in New York, and I went to Chelsea Market, which was the place in Nabisco, I think. And that's where they brought the Oreo cookie to life, as it were.
That is working.
And to be honest, when I went there for Food Network, which used to be there, I never realized that because I'd just run in, go to the studio, and go out again because it was always so
Mhm.
busy. So I love that.
Well, I worked in Chelsea Market as well when I worked for Oxygen Network, and it was such an amazing place to work. But for me, it was so exciting because to me, it was the Nabisco factory. And apparently, um, when they changed over the building from being the factory to
Yeah.
being really expensive, you know, place to work
Yes.
and live, is they had old pipes that still had molasses stuck in them as
Oh,
it had been for the past 80 years, since they built it. I guess maybe they built it in 1915. So it was about 70 years of
wow.
old molasses because the trains used to carry the flour directly into the building from Pennsylvania, which is why we have the High Line, another American, um, another New York City, terrific tourist destination.
I love that. I love that. And anyway, you talk about cookies coming from this Dutch thing, though. But when I talk about cookies as well, I always think about the Persian side of it as well, because they. So, do
Mhm.
you know much about that?
I know a little bit about it, and that the Persians are where we if we want to go back to like the badly said, but like the or cookie,
Yeah.
it would be to Persia. That's where we have our earliest known examples of cookies, which were small cakes, and they weren't sweetened with sugar. They tended to be sweetened with other things that were more readily available at the time, like honey or other extracts, like from plants and trees. And usually flavored with something like rose water, a tradition that carried straight on. I mean, it traveled up then, the cookie up from Persia and gathered all the spices along the spice route and made their way into Europe, where they really exploded all over the place.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that later, but let's talk about Holland as well. So, when we talk about Holland coming to the US, a lot of people don't even know that. So, when they came over, New Amsterdam, for example,
Mhm.
what was that little cake that they got to bring over, and how was that kind of functional in America?
The little cake was traditionally a sweet, buttery cake, um, often flavored. The common flavorings at the time were mace, which is the thing that you
Yeah,
find on the outside of the nutmeg, lemon. There was a lot of lemon going on, considering that we're not a tropical area. We were bringing it in from other places, and also lemons could be grown eventually in like your own greenhouse, so
yeah.
people could have lemons. Um, Ginger was a huge spice. And then
Oh,
we also
okay.
had seed cookies, which they brought over with them. They weren't as easy to grow here, caraway seeds or crushed coriander. And that was what
Oh,
flavors the first cookie that first appears in a recipe book here.
wow. So let's think about this. Now, I heard somewhere that it was test cake. So they used to put like a mix of ingredients into the oven to check that it was at temperature.
Mhm.
And I've just heard that, but I don't know if it's true or not. I think that's a great idea, though.
I That's where I land on it, having not actually been there. I land on the fact that people needed to test the temperature of their ovens, and if you and a cookie is you see how quickly it bakes, you see how
Yeah.
hot the oven is. I would be worried though that it would burn very easily in certain hot ovens that you were trying out. So, and cookies did tend to be cooked after the other things. So when people started cooking cookies for cookies' sake, which you have to admit, once you start eating these little cakes that you've been testing in the oven, you think, why aren't I focusing on them, right?
Yeah.
Instead of these big cakes.
So
Um,
I have
you
to.
needed a cool oven. I'm sorry.
So
Go on.
you start.
I was saying you need a cooler oven, not the one you bake bread in, to cook or to bake a cookie in one of the old timey ovens that you had. So,
Old
uh,
timey ovens. Sounds like a great name for a band.
yeah.
No, but what was interesting is I know in India, for example, when we did the tandoor, they would
Mhm.
put after the tandoor, which is super high heat, they would put things into the oven which they would cook overnight, like makhni dal. And I
Mm.
wonder whether they put these cookies in to just see how the oven is going down in temperature, and so
Hmm.
by putting them in anyway. I think that's I really think, and I want to believe that this is what they wanted to do with it. But tell me, oh, what what I wanted to say as well is Cookie for Cookie's Sake. That's got to be your next book, hasn't it? I think that is a great name. So
Hmm.
I'm giving you that for free.
Thank, thank you very much.
But tell me about when they first came to America. Um, is that something that they went all around, well, the East Coast of America straight away? Was it just stuck in New York where they had the Dutch, and New Amsterdam,
Mhm.
as I mentioned? Did they go across everywhere?
They started in New York and also up in Boston. I will give some credit to the British who came
Hurrah! Hurrah!
and brought their biscuits with them. It was jolly lovely, I say. um, but those tended to be a harder cookie, as it were. And eventually, I think the two sort of melded. The earliest cookies that we have, these small cakes, um, really tended to be on the softer side of things, as we know, and and also many of them have very silly names. Like we're the land of, and I have an entire list of them, but we all know snickerdoodles, right?
But was that one that they invented? Tell me about these names then. I've never heard of these odd names. So that's going to be really interesting for me.
Some people, nobody really can pinpoint where the word snickerdoodle comes from, but people are like, well, maybe it's from a sort of German or Dutch bastardization of some other word like schnecken or snail or something. Nobody really knows. But don't you want to eat a snickerdoodle?
Well, I thought it
They're,
was much more modern. I thought it was something they came up in the 60s or 70s with.
Snickerdoodles, I mean, they did in that everybody who went to a home economics class learned to bake a snickerdoodle. Um, Uh, but they in the 18th and 19th century, it was a basic cookie that became popular in the Northeast. I have to say, as a person who has spent a lot of time with chocolate chip cookies, the Northeast has contributed enormously. Maybe even as someone from the Northeast, I'll be a bit pig-headed and say maybe the most to cookiedom in the United States.
So what was it that got them into the cookiedom, as you say?
Well, I think it has to do with sugar.
Well, that's
And
that's a really interesting point, because I was going to talk about sugar now, because before, there wasn't much sugar going around, and it was something that nobles ate, in England and all of that. It was very hard to get. But then it became suddenly very available. And I'm sure that must have something to do with cookies being popular as well. So, would you tell us about that? I mean, how sugar, I mean, there's so much. I did a whole thing about sugar on this podcast, but a little bit about how sugar came to the United States and where it went everywhere.
um, I would ask people to really listen to your podcast because it's true. This history of sugar is also a very dark history because it
Oh,
has so much to do with the slave trade
of course.
and enslaved peoples who, you know, died to create sugar for all of us,
Yeah.
right? Um, and and people became very, very wealthy for it. But being in these coastal towns like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, this is where people were centered, where the first cookbooks were being written, and where you had access to sugar, both brown sugar and white sugar. And so people started making cookies and doing whatever they could with it. Because, like once you start eating sugar, it's very hard to stop. And
Yes,
they,
I have to say that. When we talk about brown sugar and white sugar, just to explain to people what's the difference between them.
Brown sugar is moister. It has molasses in it traditionally. There are people out there who will make their own brown sugar from granulated
Oh,
sugar.
wow.
There's a woman somewhere on the internet, I think she's a very nice frugal housewife in Britain who is like, I'll show you how to make your own brown sugar. And she does. Um, but mostly it's made by adding molasses, which is part of the refining process, back to the refined white sugar. And that's how you can make it now. And it adds a wonderful moistness to cookies. It adds a wonderful deep caramel flavor to cookies and keeps a cookie chewy. In fact, we'll probably talk about this a little later, but when you're looking at creating a chocolate chip cookie, what you look at is varying the ratio of brown sugar to white sugar to vary your textural outcome. I just made that up, but it sounds fancy.
I'm going to let you get away with this British accent because you're married to a British guy, aren't you? So I'm,
Yeah.
I'll let you get away with it. Um, but I noticed that in most countries, sugar is lower than in America. And in America, in the cookies, I read that it's twice as much or even three times as much sugar. And in the biscuits, which are obviously based on the ship's biscuits and things like that. I
Mhm.
noticed that they have a lot less sugar. And I understand. I mean, I love cookies, but I can't eat them all the time. So
Mhm.
where does that sugary kind of love come from?
I would personally date all of this back to the Industrial Revolution, my favorite subject, the Industrial Revolution, because of everything it did. And at the time, in the early parts of the Industrial Revolution, they figured out how to refine sugar.
Yeah,
And they also figured out how to more easily refine sugar beets, which were things that you could grow a lot. You grew it in Hawaii and other places, but you could also grow it in the United States. In
yeah,
fact, still grow a lot of it here. But that meant that it was more readily available. But the other thing that was going on, like I said, industry busting out all over. People moving from farms where they typically fed themselves to moving to cities so they could work in factories. And factories had very specific hours, and I want you to work these hours, and you're going to keep going. And so, what did they suggest that people eat to keep themselves ready to go and keep the mills milling and the looms looming? Sugar. And so it became cheap to buy. And, it's like making cigarettes cheap for people. You're like, okay, this is wonderful. And it was really pushed upon workers, like industrial workers, that they should eat sugar to keep going and to keep their energy up and to get the calories that they needed because they probably didn't have enough money to get what one would call proper calories.
Oh, wow. And that's, again, it sounds like sugar is just, a nice thing that we put into cookies, for example, but it's got all that background to it. Before we move on, would you like to tell us the difference between beet sugar and sugar cane? And because that, again, is coming from very different areas.
They come from very different areas. Sugar cane mostly comes from like the tropical regions. It was originally probably came from parts of India, southern India, and sugar beets were first, I think. It was a German who figured out how to transform sugar beets into refined sugar. But the difference between them is nothing. They both produce sucrose. They both produce the same molecule.
Interesting.
And so today you might be eating sugar beet sugar or you might be eating sugar cane sugar.
Wow. I mean, that's extraordinary because, again, once beets are involved, it becomes a lot easier to produce. And again, that means that everyone gets it very cheaply. Um,
Right.
I wanted to ask you about this, though. Someone suggested that it was Alan Davidson, in fact, from the Oxford Companion to Food. He was the one that said the cookies were only created on New Year's Day. And that's the only time they were passed out. And this is very interesting because I wanted to know what you thought of that because I thought they'd constantly be feeding people these sweet treats. But I
Yeah.
thought that was interesting.
I don't buy into that, to be fair, with all due respect to him and to the Oxford book of food, which I love and I hold close to my heart.
Yeah.
However, you'll see recipes for New Year's Day cookies. Like there are two recipes in the first cookbook that Amelia Simmons, in the first cookbook by Amelia Simmons, 1796, there are two recipes for cookies. It's the first place we see cookie spelled like cookie, like almost like we do now.
Yeah.
Sometimes spelled with an EY, but here it was IE. And there's one recipe for regular cookies and one recipe for New Year's Day cookies. And the New Year's Day cookie tradition was popularized by the Dutch, our friends the Dutch and their cookies. And they would make them. It was a buttery spice cookie. And they would make them to hand out at their open houses that they would have, that were traditional to have on New Year's Day in New York City in the early parts, in the early times when the Dutch were hanging out in what was then New Amsterdam. So the New Year's tradition of cookies just being, there's a special New Year's cookie, but I don't think it was the only time it was not the only time people ate cookies. Okay. And I think Amelia Simmons sort of proves that by having a regular cookie and a New Year's Eve cookie.
Well, that's
a New Year's Day cookie.
I love the fact that when you're talking about these, you're going the same way as the questions I've got to ask for you, because I wanted to talk about Amelia Simmons. Well, before that, and before she wrote about it, I'm guessing the cookies were around, but of course, she was the first one to write it. And I don't know if you've got any of the ingredients that he used in her cookies, and maybe you could even share what those cookies are, and then we could move on to something else.
I actually, on my computer, because I'm that person, I have a screenshot of the first cookbook.
Wow.
But I closed out my preview before I came on. But I have the recipe here if you'd like me to read it to you.
I would love you to read it, because I know that people who listen to this show, most of them will go out and go, I want to try that one, because they're like you or me. They don't just want to hear, oh, that's interesting. They want to go and make them. And that's really fantastic.
This is not translated from the Amelia Simmons into the modern cooking. So this is just pure Amelia Simmons.
Which is great.
And it's 1 pound sugar boiled slowly in a half pint of water. So that's an interesting way to start off, by basically melting your sugar. Scum well, which I think is another way of removing the scum, and cool. And then add 2 teaspoons of pearl ash, which was the precursor to baking soda or baking powder that acts as a leavener. And you dissolve it in milk, the pearl ash. Then 2.5 pounds of flour.
Wow.
Rub in 4 ounces of butter, 2 large spoons of finely powdered coriander seed, and you wet that with the above. In other words, you mix the dry and wet ingredients together, as we would say today. And then you roll them 1/2 inch thick and cut to the shape you please, which is very thoughtful of her. And bake 15 to 20 minutes in, and I love this phrase, a slack oven.
What does a slack oven mean?
I think it means an oven that is not ferociously hot.
That's fantastic. And that was from what year?
1796.
Wow. Okay. And that's not dissimilar to how we cook them now. I mean,
not at all. Well, except for the boiling of the sugar. But the thing that you look at in this recipe is sugar and flour have the highest ratio in there. There's only 4 ounces of butter. 4 ounces of butter to 2.5 pounds of flour. Normally, if you made a cookie right now, you'd make a cookie with 4 ounces of butter and, say, 2.5 cups of flour, which is 240 grams.
I wonder whether that's because butter was more expensive.
I think so.
Wow.
I think it was, unless you were, you had the cow. I'm pointing outside to my backyard, like I might have a cow there. I won't have a cow in my backyard. So I think the sugar played a much higher function in adding moisture to that cookie itself.
Oh, I love that. This is so fantastic. Thank you. Because a lot of people, again, are going to listen to this and they think, oh, we're just talking about cookies, but it's a part of the gradual realization of different foods into everything that we do. So
Right.
I think that's amazing. Now, because you write about chocolate chip cookies, when did the chocolate chip cookie come into fashion? Your terrific book shows just how great, obviously, chocolate is, but when did chocolate come to America? When did all of this come? And then someone put them together, as it were.
As it were. You know this, I'm sure you've talked about it on your show. Chocolate was originally a drink,
Yeah.
right? And it wasn't until the 1870 or so that a nice Englishman named Mr. Fry decided he figured out how to turn chocolate into a chocolate bar. The Swiss were also off doing it somewhere, but my allegiance is really with it. But they were figuring out their own things to do with chocolate in order to incorporate, make a smooth chocolate bar. I mean, so this bar that Mr. Fry was making, Fry's chocolate,
Yeah.
was a smoother chocolate that it was nicer to eat as opposed to the rough and
Harsher.
ready one that you might crush up to
Yeah.
drink. And so the chocolate bar became popular. Even at the turn of the century, chocolate became much more of a mainstay. Snacking became more popular, right?
Interesting.
And the idea of the 5-cent chocolate bar or the 2-cent chocolate bar, because also at the turn of the century, I mean, it's all sort of happening at once.
Yeah.
It's really why it's my favorite period of time to study. The Hershey Company was creating chocolate, and people were selling it not just for the true pleasure of eating chocolate, but also because it was full of calories, and everyone tried to pawn it off as something good for you, too. But
Well, it
I
is,
wanted,
isn't it?
yeah, I mean,
Because I always eat chocolate, and I understand that it brings me lots of energy
it,
and anyway,
and pleasure. It
and a
brings me
lot of pleasure.
more
A,
pleasure, right?
a lot of
Um,
pleasure. But that's interesting because you talk about snacking, you talk about pleasure, you talk about, and before that, there wasn't much in the terms of snacking. So I'd love to, if you know more about that. I hadn't really thought about that area of it. So if you know anything about that, I'd love to hear it.
um, I know a little bit, which is, I mean, because it just gets into all these different parts of history. And I'm
Yeah.
like, but I have to tell you about the Nabisco Company. I have to tell you about Hershey's. I have to tell you about, because
Cadbury's.
Cadbury's, have to talk about, because of our friend industrialization, it meant that processed foods soon became much more popular. Processed foods also incorporated things like sugar in them to make them have a longer shelf life. And this wasn't just a 1950s post-World War sort of
Yeah.
thing. This was the 1870s, the 1880s. Some of our most popular foods come from that, like Philadelphia cream cheese and
Yeah.
other things all come from around that time. And even Nabisco, I was reading about the history of Nabisco, which, as we were talking about,
Yeah.
comes from the Chelsea market. That's where theirs is a very long story, a story of their own sort of robber barondom, which I can go into at length if you want me to. But one of the things that they created at the turn of the century, their first cookie was something called the Unida biscuit,
Okay.
spelled Uneeda, and they did sue the person who wanted to create the You Want a biscuit, because
Wow.
there's always going to be someone like that. They start creating the Fig Newton.
Okay.
They start creating animal crackers.
Wow.
Now, when I say they start creating, I don't want people out there who know the real history to go, but there were animal crackers before that, and there were Fig Newtons before that. They were. But Nabisco takes its big arms and wraps all of those bakeries
Okay.
under its own. But then I read that sometime in the 1910s, they come up with, I think that I still called nabs, those little cheddar cheese crackers that are filled with peanut butter that you can
Ooh.
buy in the grocery store.
I've
Oh,
I've
I'm
never had one of those, so I don't know too much about them.
okay. Well, I need you to go out and try them.
Okay.
And everyone who out there in podcast land who's had them is going, "Mhm." They're these little square cheese crackers, like bright orange cheese crackers filled with a peanut buttery paste.
That
And
sounds
they were also
nice, actually.
they're really good. They're really junky and they're really good, but they were a snacking food.
Okay.
And so this was early on in the 1900s. And that's how we started eating more and more snacks. I have drifted away, though, from my favorite person, which is Ruth Wakefield.
Okay. So tell us about Ruth.
Well, Ruth is the creator, we claim today, as the creator of the chocolate chip cookie.
Oh, okay.
And talk about myth. And I really wanted to title my the chapter about the history of it as myth and myth understanding, but I don't know if they let me do. They didn't. Anyway, Mrs. Wakefield owned an inn that may not surprise you of its name. It was the Toll House Inn, which is why we eat Toll House cookies today. Her
Oh,
inn, her inn was wildly popular with people, and it was famous for its boiled New England dinners, like lobsters. She was a well-known cook. She was a former home economist and had opened this inn with her husband. And as the story goes, and
where
there are
was this?
many different
Sorry.
stories. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, where is this inn?
This inn is, this inn burned down in the 1980s, I think.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
now like a Wendy's and a Walgreens parking lot, but it is in eastern Massachusetts.
Okay.
But it was a very popular inn, and like all the famous people would, on their way out to like Cape Cod or to Nantucket, would stop there and have a fabulous dinner. Like Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, they all went there, and she was looking apparently for a cookie, something new to go alongside a dish of ice cream that she was serving.
Wow.
And she decided she had a woman who worked with her as well, who was her sous chef there. So I think I think her name was actually Sue, as it was, helped her to conjure up this cookie. There are so many myths out there. People like, I heard that, she'd run out of cocoa, so she put chocolate in the cookie thinking it would melt, and it didn't. And ta-da! Or that's just one of the many myths.
I'm sure there's myths about everything that we
Right.
have in food right now, but I love those myths, despite the
You
fact
do.
none of them have any thing in truth, but they're really fun.
They are. And I think, and everybody has their own idea about how it started. The thing about Ruth that people don't realize is Ruth was a home economist, which was the job for ladies who liked science at the time,
Yeah.
And she would not have wasted a penny to make something that she didn't know how it was going to come out. You know
Right.
what I mean? I think she was very frugal and very mindful of how a recipe worked. Nestle's sold chocolate bars, and they had different. Were marked, and they came with like its own little chisel, and so you would
Wow.
chisel apart the bars to make the chocolate chips.
I think
Mrs. Wakefield goes on the Betty Crocker Cooking School of the Air. Isn't that beautiful sounding? The Cooking School of the Air in Boston, to go on and talk about this new popular cookie that has gained a little popularity at her inn. And that recipe then spreads to the Boston Globe picks it up. And from there, the idea for this cookie kind of spreads all over New England. Nestle sees a spike in chocolate sales and says,
okay.
"Oh, let's see what's going on here. Why ever is this happening?" And they go and see Mrs. Wakefield, and they're like, "Hey, we'd love to put that recipe on the back of all our chocolate packages, the bars." And she's like, "That's great, but what about if you made the actual chips for people?" This part is all sort of
Yeah.
myth, right? The myth also goes that she was paid $1 for the recipe.
Wow.
I know. Paid $1 for the recipe, and then was given a lifetime supply of chocolate chips as a result. So
That's really
maybe it was a better deal. I think for Mrs. Wakefield, her first love was her inn. So maybe paying $1 for a recipe didn't mean much to her, but the publicity that it brought the Toll House in was
Wow.
worth
That's
it.
that's a great story. Oh, and I wanted to talk about that because right now still think America is America is the home of the cookie. That's where
Mhm,
everyone thinks it comes from, and probably it does now. So, do you think that's because affordable during affordable during the depression, or the role of supermarkets, which began to have, and that was an American thing as well. So they
mhm.
began to get things to fill those shelves in the supermarket, decent things to fill the shelves. And they became many, 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 just like there are biscuits, many, many, many types. I mean, I go into the local supermarket here, and it's a whole aisle of biscuits. So, or not biscuits, sorry, cookies. So I
Mhm.
really, how did that happen?
I think Mr. Nabisco, that was not his name, the Nabisco conglomeration had a lot to do with it. And it's worth noting, Mr. Cookie, here, that you, as the fan of the biscuit, Nabisco stands for National Biscuit Company,
Yeah.
which is sort of funny when you think about it all being about cookies. So, uh, but he's, Mr. Nabisco is a guy named Adolphus Green who's running the company at the beginning of the century. And he's like, okay, we got to make sure that we sell this sanitary product. Sanitation was a big deal then because
Yeah, of
everything had been
course.
adulterated at the end of the 1800s. And they're like, we are going to create cookies that have a better shelf life too. And they're going to have self-sealing packages, the seal, which we still have today. And he sent people out. They were called the UNITA cadets, and he would send them out to clear the shelves off of stale biscuits, so that whenever you met up with a Nabisco product, you were assured a it's sanitary and delicious do not go together. But let's say it's 1901, and you're
Yeah,
really hot for those two words together: sanitary and delicious experience, and it was readily available on your grocer's shelf. Why wouldn't you eat them? You didn't have to bother baking. More of us were living in cities, right?
I mean, again, this is all falling into the history side of things. And people are now going, oh, but we've always had an aisle full of, but they don't understand how supermarkets got there, how all the things were filled with whatever they're going to be. And that's, for me, is so interesting. Okay, let's just share some of the other cookies that you love, like oatmeal, or, well, I don't know that you love them, but you know what I'm saying. Peanut
Yeah. Oh,
butter, things that I love. Peanut butter cookies are like my standard because I absolutely love those. Girl Scout cookies, which I've got at the moment. I've got one at the moment, which is, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's a toffee tastic biscuit. And,
mm-hmm.
my wife has Thin Mints in the freezer right now, of
And the
course.
freezer, right?
No, of course. So, I
I'm
mean,
actually
I'd love.
looking at a package. I'm looking at a package of peanut butter cookies, peanut butter sandwich cookies across from me right
And
now.
so, just a few of those. I mean, how did the Girl Scout cookies start arriving?
I don't actually know the history of the Girl Scout cookie. I just know that nowadays there's a little bit of a discrepancy between which bakery baked your Girl Scout cookies because people say flavors vary. So
Oh,
that's something for our Instagram influencers to get on top of and like do side by side taste tests.
oh, I'll have to. Yeah, I'll have to go and maybe do some testing myself.
That was actually, I was supposed to be doing a podcast on Saturday morning, and my guest was going to be late. And the reason I have chocolate, those cookies out all over there is, one, I have a Girl Scout who lives next door, and she's a good salesperson. And the other thing was, I was like, okay, well, if he's not here on time, I'm going to start eating and tasting cookies live on my podcast to tell people how they're tasting.
Oh,
I
well,
mean,
maybe that's because I've never tasted your cookies, and I've never tasted. I know because you're in New
that's
York and
chocolate.
I'm in LA, and they're not, they're fresh. But maybe we'll have to organize that before the end. So, um,
So I was going to tell you about other kinds of cookies,
yeah,
like the snickerdoodle,
yeah.
which we know is this classic. I did a sort of stunt piece for Food 52 at one point where I tested 12 different snickerdoodle recipes to come and to be able to figure out the best snickerdoodle recipe from all of this tasting,
Is
rather
that
like Ella Quittner does with her books now.
is that because you wanted to taste snickerdoodles, or because you had to taste? People can't see this, but I'm doing finger quotes because, yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure
I'm
you just
saying,
had to, didn't you? You just had
you know, Simon, my father was a scientist, and I grew up in the learning about the scientific method. So, of course, I felt the need to try all of them
Of
before
course.
arriving
Of
at the
course.
perfect one. I mean, would it be? I mean, I have to have some sort of, you know, this is how I get my street cred as far as cookies are concerned.
So
Um,
what other types of cookies have you been trying? There are different types of what names they have to them.
well, the oatmeal cookie is also, I think, considered, even though the oat came to us, the oatmeal style cookie came to us from our Scottish and English
Yeah.
forebears who came over here. We really transformed it from being a very sort of dry digestive, with no disrespect to the digestive. We can talk about them later. I
No
will
arguments about the digestive. I love the
never.
digestive.
I
Love the digestive.
I was going to admit this maybe at the end, Simon, but I would actually say the dark chocolate covered digestive may be in my top three cookies.
Well, the mine is the hobnob covered in chocolate, but we'll talk about that later on then.
Anyway, we'll talk about that later. So, the oatmeal cookie came about in the 1900s. First, there are some recipes that appear before Fanny Farmer, the famed head of the Boston Cooking School, who publishes her seminal cookbook around that time. And that really spread cookies all over the United States because it was such a popular cookbook. And she had recipes for an oatmeal cookie, much like the one we would see today.
Wow.
And also raisins. Like a lot of these recipes come out of like promotional pamphlets from the California Raisin Board. And they had a recipe in like 1910 for oatmeal's cookies stuffed with raisins. And we will go from there. There are people out there who don't like oatmeal cookies because of the raisins. I say to you, leave the raisins, put chocolate chips in it.
That's really interesting. But that's what I was going to ask you is from northeast of England, from northeast of America, how did it go? I mentioned right now that I've got uh, a cookie store in our gas station, and it's at the back, and it's beautiful, and that's because the wife has married the owner of the gas station, and she's put up this cookie store, and it's wonderful. And so, how did it go all the way across the US? Was that because of the rail travel, and they served it on the trains as well, or what? How did that happen? Because now there's not a city, there's not a town, there's not a little village that doesn't have cooking operation of some sort.
Well, I think that the German bakers that moved to this country and started spreading the joy of cookies, because cookies are a very important part of like German baking culture. And so the buttery cookies that we come to know and love around Christmas time, this spread through. I mean, think about Chicago as being
Yeah,
a center for these sort of baked goods, and they spread out into the Midwest. The South has its own tradition, heavily influenced by the African American cooks
yeah,
who had to cook for people. Um, and it's there where we get peanut butter, not the peanut butter cookie, but we get, of course, Booker T. Washington
yeah.
trying to find a nutritious food for people. And of course, being American, then we're like, woohoo, let's turn it into a cookie. Because, right? Let's add some sugar, more sugar to it. And the peanut butter cookie first makes its appearance, supposedly, this is what my research shows me, around the 1930s. We start getting a peanut butter cookie.
Wow.
Um,
I Let's move on from there because we could stay talking about that forever. Um, have you ever thought about opening a shop? Then I might be able to buy cookies.
I'm more than happy to give you cookies.
Okay.
I never wanted to. I dream about opening a shop, but I don't have the work ethic to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
It's like me. I'm like, people going, have you ever opened a restaurant? And I go, no.
Oh, do you know how hard that is? You know.
But where does your obsession with cookies come from then? Because you are obsessed with it. I know that from following you and speaking to you, and everything is about, not about, but has got cookies involved in it, I think. Even your politics has cookies involved with it.
It's really true because it's a nice balance. You know what I mean? Um, the I think if I really, if this is my hourly session and you're my therapist, doctor, I would probably say the story I was told was that I was a wee baby in my mother's arms, right? New baby, cried a lot in the middle of the night, but my mother wanted to keep my brothers quiet. Let my brothers, who are much older than I am, sleep through the night and didn't want the baby's cries. So we would go down to the kitchen and she would feed me, probably formula. And she would feed me formula and she would eat these cookies from New York City that her mother would send out to her from the best bakery called Ellen's, which no longer exists. But it was a German bakery that made beautiful butter cookies, the kind that are dipped in chocolate.
Oh.
And so I was taking in cookie smell and seeing my happy mother and being happy drinking. I mean, come on, we don't need a true therapist to do this. Cookies have featured heavily all my life. Also, why not?
Yeah, well, of course. Well, why
they make
not?
you happy.
There you go. That's the perfect answer. Why not? I've had the best time talking about this, and I know you're a great person. I love, but I wanted to say, so we've got the cookbook here, which is fantastic. So you've got The Secret Life of Chocolate Chip Cookies. That's called Exciting New Ways to Enjoy Everyone's Favorite Dessert. But first of all, are there any cookies that you hate?
I mean, hate is a strong word. I mean, do you want to really it's like hating a nice person. You know what I mean?
No,
It's a
because there
cookie.
must be things that you just go, this has got. I'm not saying it's got celery in it, but it's got, it's got something in it that you just go.
I will. I'm gonna upset people with what I say.
Okay.
I really dislike a very popular American cookie that's often found at the top of everybody's Christmas tin that they give you called chocolate crinkles.
Oh, I don't
It's a
think I've even heard
chocolate
of those.
cookie. It's a chocolate cookie that they roll in powdered sugar, and when it bakes, it gets all crackly looking. It's adorable, but it's never chocolatey enough.
Oh.
It's just sort of sweet and vaguely cocoa-y, and I've never found one that satisfies. So,
Oh. And finally, you've written this book about the chocolate chip cookies, what are you going to write next?
well, I think, what did we say? Cookies for cookies' sake? That I do. I have so many cookie recipes that I think maybe a cookie book is next.
Yeah, what would you call it? Cookies for
cookies'
cooking's sake. I think that's a great one. And
And
like I said, you can have that from me.
For free, or is there a charge?
No charge. Just send me some cookies.
The other book I'm really pondering is another one that brings warmth to my being, which is the idea of the Sunday lunch.
Oh, well, the Sunday lunch is something that I just love doing when I'm in England. I love doing, the Yorkie puddings and all of that. And I'm from Yorkshire. When we're on this show, we talk about anything. People can come on and talk about what they know, but if they love something else, we'll always talk about that. And originally, the Yorkshire pudding was flat, and it was just beneath the roast beef, and the beef juices fell on this, and it was in a big tray, and that was how the Yorkshire pudding. So you ate the Yorkshire pudding first as your kind of starter. You didn't have it with your main dish, and then you had it separately for dessert with cream or ice cream or something like that. So in Yorkshire, that's how they did it. It was really terrific. I remember. And It's really,
That is unbelievable.
yeah. So it was really interesting that they didn't have it with their main course. They had it for appetizer or whatever they call it at the beginning, and for the dessert. So that's
Have you ever eaten it with the cream and the sugar or
oh yeah, yeah,
whatever?
yeah. Oh yeah, 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 all the time, and it was really delicious both times. But you never had it in the middle. Obviously, now it's moved to this. It looks like a popover, and it's
Mm.
very nice and very very tasty. But originally, it was a very flat, like little pancakey thing. Maybe a bit higher than that, but it was really good. Okay,
Yes. Hmm.
now we're going to ask. I hope these are all fun, but we're going. I hope so. Anyway, otherwise we'll have no one listening to this. But these are some fun questions that I always ask. So, if Marissa was a meal anywhere in time, anywhere in history, what would it be?
I think I would be, I would be, one of my brothers said to me once wisely, if there are not all that many pleasures being an adult, one of the things you can control is that if you wanted to, you could have cookies for an appetizer,
Yeah.
and you could have cookies for dinner, and you could have cookies for dessert. So that's my meal.
Would you go and have the cookies that maybe Ruth Wave cooked for you?
That if I could go back in time and see something, I would want to be there as she invented the chocolate chip cookie, because there's, like I said, there's so much myth around it. I want the real story.
That's fantastic. I love that. Um, if Marissa had to go back in time to any meal, what would that be?
Um, as a historian, I find that a little bit challenging because
That's why it's there.
I studied, like I said, the early 1900s, big deal for me, and studied King Edward VII and his eating habits for a long
I
while.
love that. I was thinking that yesterday about going back to his time. I was thinking that
That's so
myself,
funny.
which is
Do you know what
really
his nickname was?
no. What was his nickname?
King Tum Tum.
Fantastic. I went to the
And
place in London where he used to go and have his affairs. It's above rules, and
mhm.
I went. It was a bar. It had been turned into well, it still has the most glorious bar. But that's where he used to take his lady friends up to that, and that was he was a what was the word? He was a
Hedonist.
no, he was something else, raconteur, and everything that he done. Anyway, but
He
anyway,
did. He lived for pleasure. And if you
yes,
went, if he came to your country estate, they would pour out like a 16-course meal for him. But I can't stand the idea of eating that wearing a corset. And I probably don't want to eat like ptarmigan or whatever bird it was they were throwing at him. And I thought like maybe the Algonquin Round Table, like just a
oh,
simple, you know, loads of martinis, which isn't food, I grant you, but I
it
would
is.
want to fit in.
It
I'd want
is
to fit
food.
in. This is
So
food.
tell people about who the Algonquin people are
It's
because they're from the Algonquin Hotel in New York. But tell them about all the people, Harpo Marx, all these
Marco
people.
Marx. Me, I would want to sit across from Dorothy Parker and hope that she wouldn't you know, send her barbs my way, but it's what came with it, right? It was all the great literati of the literati, what a word, but Robert Benchley, Edmund Wilson,
Oh,
and Dorothy Parker, and others who would be there, and I'm forgetting lots of them.
it was
And
only a short group. I remember them playing croquet on the top of the Algonquin Hotel. They went up there. I mean, they had a great story. And if they had the dinners, that would be great.
yeah,
That's a
and
fantastic.
so that dinner, and they would eat very plain food. So I'd be eating like a delicious. I mean, what's wrong with a club sandwich?
Nothing
Nothing.
wrong with a club sandwich.
Mm-mm.
Nothing wrong. Which I believe means chicken under lettuce and bacon. That's what it means.
Not just that I was eating it at my fancy club. It means
No, chicken under lettuce and bacon. So there you go. Um, I see.
thank you.
Again, this is where I love where this all comes from, and that comes from a hotel. I can't remember where it was in New York, I believe. But anyway, Okay, and last question of this. If Marissa had to go back in time to see the invention of everything, but what would it be?
Oh, I think I mentioned this before, but I want to be there as Ruth Wakefield pulls those first Toll House cookies out of the oven, turns to me and says, "Would you like one?" And I can taste the first chocolate chip cookies coming out of the oven at the
That
Toll House Inn.
at the time, that would be fantastic. Oh, now finally, just for this, what are your social media sites? I know Substack, but tell us about all of them because they're, and whatever you've got, tell us.
Okay, everybody, sit down, sit quietly. We got them all. No, usually if you're looking for me, you can find me at Marissa Rothkopf Eats on Instagram, Marissa Rothkopf on Blue Sky. I'm on Threads with a similar name like Marissa Rothkopf. And of course, the place where I spend most of my time now is Substack. It's marissarothkopf.substack.com.
Fantastic. And I know that I'm beginning to write on Substack the last 3 months, and I'm getting lots of followers. And I think you begin to write a lot of things that are weightier than you ever wrote on other things. So that's great as well. I loved having you on this. I think that was absolutely just amazing. You've been great. So I just want to say, make sure to check out the website associated with this podcast at www.eatmyglobe.com, where we'll be posting the transcripts from each episode, along with all the references and resources we used putting the episodes together, in case you want to delve deeper into each subject. There is also a contact button, so please do let us know if there are any subjects that you would like us to cover. And if you like what you hear, please don't forget to join us on Patreon. Subscribe, recommend us to your family and friends, give us a good rating on your favourite podcast provider. Thank you, and goodbye from me, Simon Majumdar. We'll speak to you soon on the next episode of Eat My Globe, things you didn't know about food. The Eat My Globe podcast is a production of It's Not Much But It's Ours and Producer Girl Productions. We would also like to thank Sybil Villanueva for all her help both with the editing of the transcripts and her essential help with the research.